Get out of that door, you filthy animal!
Sir, the train driver has collapsed.
Collapsed? And you think you can fix it?
Clayton Moore Jr. pushed the teenager back.
Look at you! You stink! You're disgusting! Go back to the hole you crawled out of!
200 passengers watched the scene. No one moved.
Sir, please. Someone will die.
Shut up, what are you? A black guy know besides picking up trash?
The train shook violently. Luggage flew everywhere. Miles Preston didn't flinch. He opened an old leather-bound notebook, calmly.
90 miles an hour. 4 minutes to Coleman Bridge. 206 people on board. You just wasted 30 seconds of their lives.
Clayton's face turned pale. What happened next in that train car? No one on the train could have foreseen it. 6 hours earlier, the kitchen smelled like black coffee and old wood. Edna Preston stood at the counter in her faded blue apron, 78 years old. Hands that had buried a husband, raised a grandson, and never once trembled in front of strangers. She poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one across the table. Miles sat with his rejection letter spread flat in front of him. Ridgeway Rail Academy. 1 paragraph, no explanation, just, after careful review, we regret to inform you that your application does not meet our current standards. He had graduated top of his class in mechanical engineering, built a working scale model of a locomotive braking system for his senior project. The judges gave him a standing ovation. His teacher wrote a recommendation calling him the most naturally gifted engineering mind I have seen in 23 years of teaching. Does not meet our current standards. Miles had read that line so many times the ink was starting to fade under his thumb. Edna didn't say much about it. She never did when the wound was fresh. She let silence do what silence does. Hold the weight until you are ready to carry it yourself. But this morning was different. She reached into the cabinet above the stove, the one Miles had never been allowed to open, and pulled out a leather notebook. Brown, cracked along the spine, pages yellow with age. The old Ridgeway Rail logo stamped faintly on the cover. Take this with you today. Miles looked up. He knew what it was. He had seen his grandfather write in it 1,000 times. But Edna had never let him hold it. Not once since Harold died. Grandma, I can't. You can, and you will. She placed it in his hands. Your grandfather poured 40 years of his life into that book. Every system, every protocol, every fix they told him wasn't his to claim. Her voice didn't crack. It never cracked. He wanted you to have it when you were ready. Miles opened the first page. Harold's handwriting, small, precise, slanted slightly left. Diagrams of braking systems drawn with a ruler and a steady hand. Notes in the margins. Pressure valve must release at 12 psi, not 15. Company manual is wrong. I corrected this 1998. Page 22. A sketch of the full cabin layout. Every switch labeled, every gauge explained. Harold had drawn arrows between components showing how one system fed into the next, more detailed than any textbook. Because it wasn't theory. It was 40 years of riding steel and listening to machines talk back. Page 38, circled in red ink, underlined twice. The emergency braking protocol. 6 steps. Harold's masterpiece. The procedure that saved Ridgeway Rail from 2 derailments and became the national standard. The official manual read, developed by Ridgeway Rail Engineering Division, 1997. No name, no credit, no Harold. Miles closed the book, held it against his chest. I'll bring it back safe. Edna touched his face. Just once. The way she always did when she was trying not to cry. You bring yourself back safe. The book can handle the rest. He remembered the summers. Every June through August, from age 8 until Harold got too sick to stand. The two of them in the old maintenance yard behind the Ridgefield depot. Harold had a key, never returned it after they fired him. Nobody ever asked for it back. They would climb into the decommissioned engine, Unit 4412. Harold would lift Miles into the driver's seat, adjust the boy's hands on the throttle, and walk him through every sequence. Left hand here, right hand here. Now, what do you feel? The vibration. Good. That vibration tells you the pressure. When it changes, you change. Never fight the machine, Miles. Listen to it. It talks to you if you let it. Those summers were the only classroom Miles ever needed. Harold didn't teach theory. He taught feel, touch, instinct. The kind of knowledge that lives in your hands, not your head. Every session ended the same way. Harold would close the notebook, look at Miles, and say, "One day, someone is going to need what you know. When that day comes, don't ask for permission. Just do what's right." He almost missed the train. The 4:15 Ridgeway Express, Platform 9. 206 passengers heading north. Miles jogged through the station with his backpack over one shoulder and the notebook tucked under his arm. Economy class, seat 14C. He settled in, placed the notebook on the tray table, and opened to page 38. The Preston Method. Harold designed it in 1996 after two near derailment incidents exposed fatal flaws in Ridgeway's original system. Presented it to the board. Implemented within 6 months. Still the standard on every Ridgeway train in the country. Harold's name appeared nowhere in the documentation. Not a footnote, not a mention. 3 rows ahead, in the premium car, Clayton Moore Jr. sat with his legs crossed. Director of Operations, Ridgeway Rail. On the phone, loud enough for half the car to hear. Rebranding is on schedule. New safety manual drops October. We are removing all references to the legacy protocols. Clean slate. The board wants the Preston era gone, and I mean gone. Miles didn't hear him, but if he had, he would have recognized the name. Moore. The same name his grandmother whispered like a curse on nights she couldn't sleep. 4 seats behind Miles, Garrett Wells reviewed his clipboard. 55 years old, 31 years with Ridgeway. He had walked past on his ticket check, glanced at the notebook on the tray table, and stopped mid-step. That logo, the old Ridgeway crest. He hadn't seen it in 20 years, not since they changed it, right after they let Harold go. Garrett kept walking, but his hands were shaking. He knew that notebook. He knew who it belonged to. And the memory he had spent 2 decades burying just crawled back to the surface. At 4:52 p.m., the train cruised at 88 miles per hour through the Ashland Valley corridor. The driver, Bill Thornton, 20-year veteran, felt the headache start around 4:30. Pressure behind his left eye, tingling down his right arm. 30 more minutes to the next stop. He could make it. He couldn't. At 4:52, Thornton's left hand slipped off the throttle. His body tilted. His forehead hit the control panel. He slid to the floor. The dead man's switch released, but momentum carried the train forward. 88, 89, 90. The lights flickered twice. The overhead emergency strip flashed red. Then the alarm. A high-pitched wail that turned every head in every car. What's happening? Why are we speeding up? Garrett was in car 4 when he heard it. He ran. 3 cars in 40 seconds. Override key. Cabin door open. Thornton on the floor, unconscious. Pulse weak but present. Garrett looked at the control panel. Buttons, switches, screens blinking warnings he had never been trained to read. He was a conductor, not a driver. Tickets and passengers were his world. The driver's console was something else entirely. Radio. Static. Mountain corridor killed the signal. Emergency landline. Dead. 90 miles per hour. Coleman Bridge, 11 minutes away. Speed limit 45 at the curve. Anything above 60 and the train leaves the tracks. 206 people, 11 minutes. And the only man supposed to know what to do was lying on the floor. Garrett stepped into the corridor. His face said everything. A passenger grabbed his sleeve. "Do something." "I'm trying. Try harder." People crowded the aisle. Voices layered on top of each other. Prayers, arguments, phone calls that wouldn't connect. A woman pressed her back against the window and shut her eyes. An elderly man held his wife's hand and said nothing at all. That's when Garrett saw him, Miles Preston, standing at the end of car 2, notebook in hand, walking toward the cabin. Not running, not panicking, walking. The way someone walks when they have been preparing for a moment they hoped would never come. Garrett looked at the notebook, looked at the young man, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a 22-year-old ghost whispered a name he had been trying to forget. Harold. Let him through. Clayton Moore Jr. stepped out from Premium. Excuse me? I said let him through. You are letting some random kid into the cabin of a moving train? He's not random. Garrett's voice broke on the last word. Let him through, now. Miles reached the cabin door. He didn't ask permission. He didn't explain. He looked at Garrett, and Garrett looked back. And something passed between them that neither could name. Recognition, guilt, hope, all of it at once. Miles stepped inside. The door closed behind him. And the clock started. Miles closed the cabin door behind him. The noise, the screaming, the alarm, the chaos dropped to a low hum behind the steel. Inside, it was just him, the unconscious driver on the floor, and the control panel stretching across the front wall, blinking red warnings like a heartbeat running out of time. He set the notebook down on the console. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. Opened it to page 38. His grandfather's handwriting stared back at him, steady, patient, certain. The opposite of everything Miles felt right now. 91 miles per hour. The speedometer needle sat just past the red line. He looked at the panel. The layout was newer than the one Harold had sketched. Digital screens where there used to be analog gauges, touchpads instead of manual switches. But underneath the upgrades, the bones were the same architecture, the same logic. Harold's logic. Miles placed his left hand on the throttle. His right hand hovered over the braking console. He closed his eyes for half a second. What do you feel? The vibration. Steady. Deep. Coming from the wheels, through the floor, up through the console, into his fingertips. The same vibration Harold had taught him to read in Unit 4412 on those long summer afternoons when the rest of the world had already forgotten his grandfather existed. When it changes, you change. He opened his eyes. Step 1. Main throttle to neutral. His voice came out quiet, talking to himself, talking to Harold. He pulled the throttle back to the center position. The engine stopped accelerating, but the momentum held. Still 90. Step 2. Engage dynamic braking. Graduated release. He found the lever on the right side of the console. Slightly different position than Harold's sketch, but the mechanism was identical. He pulled it down in 3 controlled increments. The train shuddered, not violently. A slow, deep groan running through the steel, like something massive finally being asked to rest. 88. 85. Step 3. Bleed air pressure to auxiliary brakes. 12 psi, not 15. He reached under the console to the manual valve. The official Ridgeway manual said 15. Harold's notebook said 12. Harold was right then. Harold was right now. He turned the valve. The hiss of compressed air filled the cabin. 80. 75. Step 4. Distribute braking force across all axles, rear to front sequence. His fingers moved across the touchpad, selecting each car's braking unit in reverse order. The way Harold had figured out reduced the risk of jackknifing by 60%. No textbook taught this. Harold had learned it by feel, by years of listening to what the machine was telling him when nobody else bothered to listen. 70. 65. Step 5. Reduce to 40 before the curve. Hold. Coleman Bridge was 4 minutes away. The curve required 45 or under. Miles aimed for 40. He kept his hand on the dynamic brake, adjusting pressure with micro movements the way Harold had shown him. Gentle, patient, never forcing. The needle dropped. 60. 55. 50. The train leaned gently into the curve. The wheels sang against the rails, a high, clean sound, almost peaceful. 45. 42. 40. Step 6. Full stop. Apply parking brake. Miles pulled the final lever. The train exhaled, a long, slow release of pressure and momentum and 22 years of silence. The wheels locked. The steel groaned one last time. And then nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the ticking of cooling metal and the faint hum of electrical systems powering down. The speedometer read 0. Miles stood alone. His hands were trembling now. They had waited until it was safe to shake. He looked down at the notebook. Page 38. Harold's 6 steps. Every single one had worked exactly as written. 22 years after they erased his name, Harold Preston had just saved 206 lives. Behind the cabin door, silence. Then a single voice. Then another. Then the sound Miles would never forget as long as he lived. 200 people realizing at the same moment that they were still alive. The applause started in car 1 and rolled backward through every car like a wave. People were standing, crying, holding strangers and saying thank you to no one in particular and everyone at once. Garrett Wells opened the cabin door. He looked at the speedometer. 0. He looked at the notebook on the console. He looked at Miles. His eyes were red. That sequence you just ran, Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. Your grandfather wrote it. I have watched train drivers use it for 20 years. None of them knew where it came from. Miles didn't answer. He picked up the notebook, closed it carefully, held it against his chest the same way he had held it in his grandmother's kitchen that morning. A woman pushed past Garrett and grabbed Miles in a hug so tight he couldn't breathe. She was sobbing. Thank you. Thank you. I have 2 kids at home waiting for me. Thank you. An elderly man shook his hand with both of his own. God bless you, son. God bless you. One by one they came. Strangers, touching his shoulder, squeezing his arm, looking at him like he was something they had never seen before. An 18-year-old black kid from the economy car, who had just done what no one else on that train could do. Clayton Moore Jr. did not come. He stood at the far end of the corridor, with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a voice so low it was almost a hiss. His face had gone from white to red. His jaw was clenched tight. He was already making calls, already building walls. Through the window of car 3, Sophie Adams lowered her phone. She had recorded everything. From the moment Clayton shoved Miles in the aisle to the moment the train stopped, every second, every word, every ugly thing Clayton had said. She opened her social media app, typed 4 words, "Watch what just happened," and pressed share. By the time the rescue crews arrived 18 minutes later, the video had 400,000 views. By midnight, it would cross 2 million. The paramedics carried Bill Thornton out on a stretcher. Stable. The doctors would later confirm a minor stroke. Treatable. Recoverable. The police took statements. The local news crew arrived with cameras and microphones. They pointed them at Clayton Moore Jr. first, because he was wearing the most expensive suit. Clayton straightened his tie, stepped in front of the lens like he had done it 100 times. Ridgeway Rail's safety systems performed exactly as designed today. Our protocols ensured the safe deceleration of the train and the protection of all passengers on board. He said it without blinking, without shame, without once mentioning the name of the 18-year-old who had actually stopped the train. But Sophie's video was already everywhere. And in the comments, one question kept repeating itself from thousands of strangers who had just watched an 18-year-old save 200 lives while a man in a suit tried to stop him. Who is that kid? Nora Caldwell saw the video at 6:47 p.m., sitting at her desk at the National Herald newsroom. She watched it 3 times. Then she picked up her phone and started dialing. She could smell a bigger story underneath. Something old, something buried, something somebody had paid very good money to keep hidden. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the Preston house. Not from Ridgeway Rail Academy this time. From Ridgeway Rail Corporation's legal department. The letter offered Miles a settlement, $50,000, in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. He would agree to never publicly discuss the events on the train, never claim credit for stopping it, and never mention his grandfather's name in connection with Ridgeway Rail. $50,000 to buy his silence. $50,000 to erase another Preston. Miles read the letter twice. Then he picked up the phone and called Thomas Bradley. Bradley was a civil rights attorney who had spent 30 years fighting discrimination cases in the transportation industry. He had seen the viral video the night it dropped. He had been waiting for this call. They met the next morning. Bradley's office was small and cluttered with case files and framed newspaper clippings of victories that had taken years to win. Miles laid out the notebook on the desk. The rejection letter from the academy. The settlement offer from the corporation. "They want me to disappear," Miles said quietly. "The same way they made my grandfather disappear." Bradley picked up the notebook, turned the pages slowly. His expression changed with every page, from curiosity to recognition to something that looked like controlled fury. "What do you want, Miles?" Miles didn't hesitate. He had been rehearsing this answer in his head since the moment the train stopped. "I want them to say his name. Publicly. On the record. I want Harold Preston recognized as the creator of the emergency braking protocol. I want his title restored in every company document. I want a scholarship fund in his name for black engineering students. I want Clayton Moore Jr. to apologize. Not to me, to my grandmother, in person, in front of cameras. And I want a guarantee that no employee will ever be fired for their race without independent review." Bradley wrote it all down. 5 conditions, non-negotiable. He looked at Miles over the top of his glasses. "You understand, they will fight every single one of these." "I know. It could take months. It will get ugly. They have an army of lawyers, more money than you can imagine, and media connections that reach the top. My grandfather had none of those things, and he still built the system that saved their lives." Miles placed his hand flat on the notebook. "I am not signing their paper. I am not taking their money, and I am not sitting down." Bradley smiled for the first time, small but real. "Then let's get to work." That evening, Clayton Moore Jr. received a call from Bradley's office, outlining the 5 conditions. Non-negotiable. Clayton laughed out loud, The sound echoed off the walls of his corner office on the 32nd floor. That kid wants us to apologize? For what exactly? Bradley's voice came through the line, calm and precise as a scalpel. For everything you have been hiding for 22 years, Mr. Moore. I would suggest you stop laughing, because by this time next week, the whole country is going to know exactly what your family did to Harold Preston. Clayton stopped laughing. Miles got home a little after 10 that night. The porch light was on. It was always on when Edna was waiting. She was sitting at the kitchen table with the television on mute. The screen showed a news anchor talking over Sophie's video, the same clip that was now everywhere. Edna had watched it 11 times. She hadn't moved from that chair in 3 hours. Miles set his backpack down by the door. He placed the notebook on the table between them. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The only sound was the refrigerator humming and the muffled voice of the news anchor on the television screen. Then Edna reached out and touched the notebook. Her fingers traced the cracked leather spine, the way you touch something that belongs to a ghost. He would have been proud of you today. I used his protocol, Grandma, step by step, exactly how he wrote it. I know. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. I watched. Miles pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The kitchen smelled the same way it always did. Coffee, dish soap, and the faint sweetness of whatever Edna had baked that afternoon. It smelled like every safe place Miles had ever known. Grandma, I need to tell you something. Edna looked at him. The man who blocked me on the train. His name is Clayton Moore, Jr. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Edna's hands went still on the notebook. Her jaw tightened. She didn't blink. Moore, she said. Not a question, a quiet verdict. He is the director of operations at Ridgeway Rail. His father was the one who... I know who his father was. Edna's voice dropped low. Not angry. Something deeper than anger. Something that had been sitting in her chest for 22 years, quiet and patient, waiting for a reason to surface. His father sat across a desk from Harold and told him his work belonged to the company, that his name didn't matter, that he should be grateful they let him work there at all. She paused, took a breath, then continued. Your grandfather came home that night and sat right where you are sitting now. He didn't say a word. He just opened that notebook and started writing. He wrote all night, page after page. I brought him coffee at midnight. He didn't look up. I brought him breakfast at 6. He was still writing. Miles looked down at the notebook. He had never heard this story before. What was he writing? Edna reached over and opened the notebook to the very last page. There, tucked between the back cover and the final sheet, was a folded letter. Yellowed. Creased. Never sent. Miles unfolded it carefully. The paper felt like it might crumble between his fingers. Harold's handwriting. The same small, precise letters. But these words were different from the technical notes and diagrams that filled the rest of the book. These words were personal. To the Board of Directors, Ridgeway Rail Corporation. I am writing this letter not to ask for my job back. I am writing it because I need you to know that I existed. I designed the emergency braking protocol that your company now uses on every train in your fleet. I tested it. I refined it. I risked my career to present it to you when your own engineers said it couldn't be done. You took my work. You removed my name. You told me to be grateful. I am not grateful. But I am not angry either. I am tired. I am tired of being erased. I don't need your money. I don't need your title. I need you to remember that I was here, that I built something that mattered, that my name was Harold James Preston, and I mattered too. Miles put the letter down. His hands were shaking. Edna watched him. She had read that letter 100 times over the past 22 years. Every word was carved into her memory like scripture. "He never sent it," she said softly. "He said there was no point. He said they would throw it away." Miles folded the letter and placed it back inside the notebook. He pressed his palm flat against the cover. They are not going to throw it away this time. Edna looked at her grandson for a long, still moment. Then she nodded once, got up from the table, put the kettle on, and for the first time in 22 years, something in her shoulders loosened, just slightly, like a door that had been locked for decades had finally been cracked open from the inside. The next afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. Edna opened it. Garrett Wells stood on the porch in civilian clothes. No uniform, no clipboard. Just a man in a wrinkled shirt who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. "Mrs. Preston, my name is Garrett Wells. I worked with your husband." Edna studied him for a long time. Then she stepped aside and let him in. They sat in the living room. Miles stood near the window, arms crossed. Garrett sat on the edge of the couch with his hands between his knees, like a man sitting in a confession booth. "I was 33 years old when they fired Harold," Garrett began. His voice was thin, carefully controlled. "I had been with the company for 3 years. I was in the room when Clayton Moore Sr. told Harold that the braking protocol was company property, that Harold had no claim to it, that if he pushed the issue, they would find grounds to terminate him." "And what did you do?" Miles asked from the window. Garrett's eyes dropped to the floor. "Nothing. I did nothing. I sat in that room and I watched it happen, and I told myself it wasn't my fight." The silence in the room was heavy enough to touch. 2 weeks later, they manufactured the incident report. Said Harold had violated safety procedures during a routine inspection. It was a lie. Everyone in the department knew it was a lie. But nobody said anything. Because if they went after Harold Preston, a man who had given them their best safety innovation in 30 years, they could go after anyone. Garrett looked up at Edna. His eyes were wet. "He looked at me on his way out, your husband. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said, 'You could stop this.' And I looked away. I have been looking away for 22 years, Mrs. Preston, and I am done." Edna sat perfectly still. Her hands rested in her lap. Her face gave away nothing. 22 years of pain, and she held it the same way she held everything, with grace that cost more than anyone would ever know. Then she spoke, quiet and clear. "It is not too late to use your voice, Mr. Wells." Garrett let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since 2004. "I will testify, publicly, whatever you need, whatever your lawyer needs. I will tell them exactly what happened in that room. Every word, every name, every lie." Miles uncrossed his arms. He looked at Garrett, this man who had carried guilt like a stone in his pocket for 2 decades, and felt something he didn't expect. Not anger, not contempt, something close to respect. Because it takes a different kind of courage to admit you were a coward. While Garrett was confessing in the Preston living room, Nora Caldwell was digging. She had spent the past 48 hours pulling every thread she could find. Freedom of information requests, former employee interviews, public records from the Ridgeway Rail Safety Board. And she had found something. A set of internal meeting minutes from March 2004. The meeting where the board voted to adopt Harold's braking protocol. The minutes were supposed to be classified, but a former secretary, now retired and tired of keeping secrets, had kept a personal copy. The document read, Motion to adopt emergency braking protocol as designed by H. Preston, senior engineer. Motion carried unanimously. Action item. Reassign protocol credit to engineering division. Remove individual attribution per C. Moore directive. Remove individual attribution per C. Moore directive. There it was, in black and white, not a rumor, not a suspicion, a direct order from Clayton Moore Sr. to steal Harold Preston's work and erase his name. Nora kept digging. She found 3 more cases. 3 other black engineers who had been pushed out of Ridgeway Rail between 2002 and 2006. Different departments, different supervisors, same pattern. Contribution, credit theft, manufactured violations, termination. It wasn't one man's grudge. It was a system, a policy, a pattern so consistent it could only be deliberate. She wrote it all down. She called Miles that same evening. I am writing the story, but I need your help. I need the notebook. What for? Your grandfather's handwriting, his original diagrams. If I can match them line by line against the official Ridgeway Protocol documents, we have physical proof that Harold created the system. Not circumstantial, not testimonial. Physical. The kind of proof no lawyer can argue away. Miles looked at the notebook sitting on the kitchen table. Harold's life work. His grandmother's most sacred possession. I will bring it to you tomorrow. That weekend, Miles drove out to the old Ridgefield maintenance yard. The gate was chained shut, a faded warning sign wired to the links. The chain was rusted through. One good pull, and it broke apart in his hands. The yard was overgrown. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete. The maintenance building, where Harold had spent 40 years of his life, was a skeleton of peeling paint and broken windows. Rain had gotten in. Birds had nested in the rafters. The company had let it rot the same way they had let Harold's memory rot. Miles walked through the main hall. His footsteps echoed off the concrete floor. Dust floated in the shafts of afternoon light coming through the shattered windows. He found what he was looking for on the back wall of the main workshop. A plaque, wooden, mounted behind glass that was now cracked and clouded with age. The plaque listed every senior engineer who had worked at the Ridgefield facility between 1970 and 2010. 12 names. 12 men who had built the trains that connected half the country. Evenly spaced, neatly engraved. But between the 11th and 12th name, there was a gap. A blank space where a name had been removed. And over that space, someone had painted a thin layer of white primer. Carefully, deliberately, as if they could make a man disappear with a coat of paint. Miles reached up and pressed his thumb against the white patch. He rubbed, slowly, gently, the way you uncover something fragile. The primer flaked away. Underneath, letter by letter, a name appeared. Harold J. Preston, senior engineer. Miles stood there for a long time, his thumb still pressed against the glass, his grandfather's name glowing faintly under the dust and the paint and the years of silence. I see you, Grandpa. He took out his phone, photographed the plaque, sent it to Nora Caldwell with one line. They painted over his name, but it is still there. Then he sat down on the floor of the empty workshop, opened the notebook to a random page, read Harold's handwriting in the quiet afternoon light. And for the first time since the train stopped, Miles allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he was carrying. Not just a notebook, not just a protocol, but the entire unlived life of a man who had deserved so much more than the world had given him. The sun moved across the floor. The shadows grew long. And somewhere in that silence, Harold Preston sat beside his grandson one more time. The first attack came on a Monday morning. Ridgeway Rail Corporation issued a formal press release at 8 a.m. sharp. It was written by their crisis management firm, a company that charged $400 an hour to make ugly things sound clean. The statement read, "On the afternoon of April 14th, an unauthorized individual entered the driver's cabin of the Ridgeway Express during an emergency situation. While no passengers were harmed, Ridgeway Rail takes the unauthorized operation of federal railway equipment extremely seriously. We are cooperating with the Federal Railroad Administration and local law enforcement to conduct a thorough investigation into this breach of protocol." Unauthorized individual. Breach of protocol. Not a single mention of the word saved. Not a single mention of the name Miles Preston. But they weren't done. By Tuesday, a second statement landed. This one carried sharper teeth. Ridgeway Rail is considering all legal options regarding the unauthorized access to our locomotive cabin. Under Title 49 of the United States Code, the operation of railway equipment by an unlicensed individual constitutes a federal violation, punishable by fines and potential criminal charges. They were threatening to prosecute the 18-year-old who had saved 206 of their passengers. Clayton Moore Jr. went on television that evening. He sat in a leather chair in the Ridgeway Rail boardroom, American flag behind him, company logo perfectly centered in the frame. He had been media trained. Every word was measured. Every pause was deliberate. "We understand the public's emotional response to the viral video, and we are grateful that all passengers arrived safely. But we have to be clear. We cannot set a precedent where untrained civilians take control of federal transportation equipment. Today it worked out. Tomorrow it might not. Safety means following procedures, not bypassing them." He paused, looked directly into the camera, and then added with the careful precision of a man who had practiced the line 6 times in front of a mirror. "We are not the villains here. We are the ones who built the systems that keep people safe every single day." Built. He said it like it was a fact, as if he had personally laid a single rail or tightened a single bolt in his entire life, as if his family had done anything other than inherit a seat at a table that men like Harold Preston had built from nothing. The comment section underneath the broadcast erupted. Half the country wanted to give Miles a medal. The other half wanted to know why the train driver had been allowed to operate alone without a backup protocol in the first place. And a growing number, fueled by Sophie's video, which had now been viewed over 8 million times, were asking a different question entirely. Why did a man in a suit try to stop the only person who could save them? The pressure didn't stay on the screens. It followed Miles home. A letter from Ridgeway Rail's legal team arrived at the Preston house on Wednesday. Not the settlement offer. That had already been rejected. This was different. This was a formal notice of potential civil litigation. The letter stated that Miles had caused emotional distress, reputational damage, and operational disruption to Ridgeway Rail Corporation, and that the company reserved the right to seek damages. Damages. From the kid who had saved their train. The legal system, weaponized against an 18-year-old whose only crime was knowing more about Ridgeway's own equipment than anyone in its executive suite. Edna read the letter at the kitchen table. She read it once. She read it again. Then she folded it neatly, placed it on the counter beside the toaster, went out to the garden and pulled weeds for an hour without saying a single word. That was how Edna processed fury, in silence, on her knees, with her hands in the dirt, the same way she had processed every injustice this family had ever been handed. The neighbors were divided. Mrs. Callahan from across the street brought over a casserole and a handwritten note that said, "We are so proud of you, Miles." But 2 houses down, Mr. Driscoll told his wife, loud enough for the mail carrier to hear, that the boy should have stayed in his seat and let the professionals handle it. Reporters camped outside the house, 3 vans with satellite dishes parked along the curb from morning to midnight. A photographer from a tabloid tried to get a shot through the kitchen window. Edna closed the curtains for the first time in 40 years. The house that had always felt like a refuge now felt like a fishbowl. Miles sat on his bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The notebook lay on the nightstand beside him, next to the rejection letter from the academy and the legal threat from the corporation. 3 documents, 3 different ways the world had told him he didn't belong. "Maybe I should have just stayed in my seat," he said to no one. Edna appeared in the doorway. She had heard him through the thin walls of the old house. She always heard him. And let 200 people die? She walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't touch him. She just sat close enough for him to feel her warmth. "Your grandfather didn't raise you to sit down, Miles. Neither did I." She got up, paused at the door. "I am making his pot roast tonight. The one with the carrots, the way Harold liked them. Wash your hands and come downstairs." It was the smallest thing in the world. A pot roast, carrots, a grandmother's kitchen on a Wednesday evening. But in that moment, it was the only thing holding Miles Preston together. And sometimes that is all it takes. One warm meal from someone who loves you to remind you why you stood up in the first place. On Thursday morning, Nora Caldwell's article went live. The headline ran across the top of the National Herald's front page in bold black letters. "The Name They Erased: How Ridgeway Rail Stole a Black Engineer's Legacy and Tried to Bury It Twice." The article was 12,000 words long. It had taken Nora 6 days to write and 3 sleepless nights to fact-check. Every claim was sourced. Every document was scanned and embedded. Every quote was on the record. The evidence was devastating. The 2004 board meeting minutes. Remove individual attribution per Seymour directive. Harold's original notebook diagrams placed side by side with the official Ridgeway Protocol manual. Identical in every detail except one: the name of the author. Garrett Wells' sworn testimony describing the exact moment Harold was fired. Interviews with 3 other black engineers who had been pushed out of the company between 2002 and 2006. The photograph Miles had taken at the Ridgefield Maintenance Yard, Harold's name painted over on the plaque, still visible underneath the white primer. And the final piece. The piece that would bring the walls down. An internal email from 3 months ago sent by Clayton Moore Jr. himself to the head of Ridgeway Rail Academy's admissions board. The email contained one line about Miles Preston's scholarship application. "Preston family, flag and deny, do not process, do not respond with specifics." Flag and deny. The son had continued exactly where the father had left off. 2 generations of Moores, systematically erasing 2 generations of Prestons. Not out of negligence, not out of oversight, out of deliberate, documented, institutional malice. The article included a timeline showing how the Preston Protocol, as Nora had named it in the piece, had prevented at least 14 serious incidents since its adoption in 1997. 14 times Harold's work had saved lives. 14 times his name had been absent from the safety record. 14 times a black man's genius had been quietly consumed by a system that couldn't afford to credit him and couldn't function without him. The hashtag appeared within an hour. Justice for Harold Preston. By noon, it was trending nationally. By evening, it had crossed into international feeds. Engineers, activists, historians, teachers, union leaders, thousands of people sharing the article, adding their own stories of credit stolen, contributions erased, names painted over and forgotten. Ridgeway Rail's stock dropped 4% by market close. 2 board members issued private statements distancing themselves from Clayton Moore Jr. before sunset. Clayton was summoned to an emergency board meeting on Friday morning. The boardroom was cold. 8 directors sat around the mahogany table. No one offered Clayton coffee. No one made small talk. No one looked at him the way they used to, with deference, with respect, with the easy warmth that comes with being the son of the man who built the empire. The board chairman, a 70-year-old named Walter Hammond, placed a printed copy of Nora's article on the table. "Explain this." Clayton tried. He blamed the media. He blamed the viral video. He blamed activist journalists with an agenda. He said the article was largely fabricated and taken out of context. He said the email about Miles had been misunderstood. He said the legacy protocol changes were routine housekeeping. Hammond slid a second document across the table. The internal email. Flag and deny. Clayton's own words. His own email address. His own digital signature at the bottom of the page. Is this fabricated too? Clayton's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. For the first time in his career, the man who always had an answer was sitting in a room full of silence, with nowhere to hide. The board voted unanimously to suspend Clayton Moore Jr. from all operational duties, effective immediately, pending a full independent investigation into both past and present conduct. His access badge was collected at the door. Security walked him to his car. No handshake, no goodbye. As he crossed the parking lot, a photographer from the Herald captured the shot. Clayton Moore Jr., former director of operations, carrying a cardboard box to his car in the rain. Alone. The image would be published the next morning beside a photograph of Harold Preston, pulled from Edna's personal collection, smiling in his Ridgeway Rail uniform, 1995. 2 photographs. 2 very different men. 2 very different endings to 2 very different legacies. That evening, Ridgeway Rail's PR team issued a new statement. No more threats, no more legal language. The tone had shifted completely. Ridgeway Rail Corporation acknowledges the serious concerns raised by recent reporting. We are committed to a transparent review of our historical practices and will hold a public press conference on Monday to address these matters directly. A press conference. Monday. National media invited. The same boardroom where Clayton had smiled into cameras 1 week ago would now become the stage for something he never saw coming. Thomas Bradley called Miles at 9 that night. They are scared. They want to get ahead of this before it spirals further. They will try to give a surface apology, acknowledge mistakes, promise reforms, avoid naming names. Classic damage control playbook. What do? We show up. And we do not let them control the story. You have 5 conditions, Miles. Monday is the day we put them on the table in front of the entire country. Miles hung up the phone. He sat alone in his room. The notebook lay open on his lap. He turned to the last page, Harold's unsent letter. He read the final line one more time. I need you to remember that I was here. Miles picked up a pen, and underneath his grandfather's last words, in his own handwriting, he added one line. They will say your name tomorrow, Grandpa. I promise. He closed the notebook, set it on the nightstand, turned off the light. Tomorrow, everything would change, and for the first time in 22 years, the truth was going to walk into a room full of cameras, and it was not going to sit down. Monday, 9 a.m. The Ridgeway Rail Conference Hall. Every seat in the 300-person hall was taken. Camera crews lined the back wall 3 rows deep. Photographers crouched in the aisles. Reporters from every major outlet sat with notebooks open and phones recording. The Ridgeway Rail logo hung behind the podium, the new one, the one they had redesigned after they erased the old era. Underneath it, A long table with microphones, 4 chairs, water glasses that no one would touch. Edna Preston sat in the second row. She wore the navy blue dress she had worn to Harold's funeral. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight as a rail. She had not been inside a Ridgeway building in 22 years. The last time she had walked through a Ridgeway door, she had been picking up Harold's personal belongings in a cardboard box while a security guard watched to make sure she didn't take anything that belonged to the company. Miles sat beside her. The notebook was in his hands. Thomas Bradley sat on his other side, briefcase on the floor between his feet, calm as a man who had done this 100 times and never once lost his nerve. Garrett Wells sat 3 rows behind them. He had put on a suit. It didn't fit well. He kept pulling at the collar. At exactly 9:15, the Ridgeway Rail interim spokesperson, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had been brought in from corporate communications 2 days earlier, stepped up to the podium. She was polished and visibly uncomfortable. Good morning. Ridgeway Rail Corporation has called this press conference to address concerns raised in recent media coverage regarding our company's historical practices. We want to be transparent, accountable, and forward-looking. She read from a prepared statement, carefully worded, surgically vague. It acknowledged procedural shortcomings. It expressed deep respect for all engineers, past and present. Not one name, not one honest word. She paused, prepared to move into the future initiatives portion, diversity programs and scholarship funds, with no names attached. Thomas Bradley stood up. With respect, Ms. Holt, my client has a statement he would like to make. The room shifted. Every camera turned. Patricia looked at the Ridgeway legal team sitting in the front row. One of them gave a barely perceptible nod. They couldn't refuse, not with the cameras rolling, not with the whole country watching. Patricia stepped aside. Miles Preston stood up. He buttoned his jacket with one hand. The notebook was in the other. He walked to the podium with the same steady walk he had used on the train, unhurried, unafraid, as if he had been walking toward this moment his entire life. He set the notebook on the podium, opened it to the last page. Harold's unsent letter on the left, his own handwritten promise on the right. He looked out at the room full of cameras and microphones and strangers. And then he spoke. 22 years ago, a man named Harold Preston sat at a desk in this company and designed the emergency braking system that is still used on every Ridgeway train today. That system saved 206 lives 2 weeks ago. It saved your lives. And nobody here has ever said his name. The room went silent. My grandfather didn't want money. He didn't want revenge. He wanted one thing, to be remembered for what he built. You took his work. You put your name on it. You fired him when he asked for credit. And when he died, you thought the story died with him. Miles paused. His voice was steady. His eyes were clear. He was not performing. He was speaking from somewhere so deep that every person in that room felt it in their own chest. But here is what you didn't count on. He taught me. Every summer, every afternoon, every page of this book. He placed his hand on the notebook. He poured everything he knew into a kid that everyone told him wouldn't amount to anything. He looked at the row where the Ridgeway executives sat, with something worse than anger. Clarity. So here I am, standing in front of the same people who erased him, using the same system he built, holding the same book he wrote. You can erase a name from a document. You can paint over a plaque. You can flag and deny a scholarship application. He let those 3 words hang in the air. Flag and deny. Half the room flinched. But you cannot stop a grandfather from teaching his grandson. And you cannot stop that grandson from standing right here, right now, and saying what should have been said 22 years ago. Miles took one breath. Then he said it. His name was Harold James Preston. He was a senior engineer at Ridgeway Rail. He designed the Preston Protocol. And he saved every single one of you. The silence held for 3 full seconds. Then it broke. The applause started in the back of the room and rolled forward like thunder. People stood. Reporters, strangers. They stood and clapped, and some of them cried because they had just heard something real in a room built for lies. Edna didn't stand. She didn't clap. She sat in her chair with her hands folded in her lap and tears running silently down her face. She had waited 22 years to hear someone say her husband's name in a Ridgeway building, and her grandson had just said it to the entire country. Before the applause could die, a man stood up in the third row. No one had called him. No one had scheduled him. Garrett Wells straightened his ill-fitting jacket, cleared his throat, and spoke loud enough for every microphone in the room to catch it. My name is Garrett Wells. I have worked for Ridgeway Rail for 31 years, and I was there the day they fired Harold Preston. The applause stopped. The room went still. Everything this young man just said is true. I was in the room when Clayton Moore Sr. told Harold his work belonged to the company. I watched Harold walk out that door carrying nothing but that notebook. He looked at me on his way out. Garrett's voice cracked. He steadied himself. His eyes said, "You could stop this." And I looked away. I said nothing. For 22 years, I said nothing. He turned and looked directly at Miles. I am not looking away anymore. I am telling you, every person in this room, every person watching at home, Harold Preston built the system that keeps Ridgeway trains safe. He was fired for asking to be credited for his own work. The incident report was fabricated, and the company has known the truth this entire time. 2 more people stood. A retired engineer named Darnell Cooper, a former safety inspector named Raymond Foster, both black, both pushed out of Ridgeway during the same period, both silent for 2 decades. What Mr. Wells said is true. The same thing happened to me. And to me. Same playbook, same result. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The Ridgeway legal team sat frozen in their chairs like statues, watching their own building collapse around them. Patricia Holt returned to the podium. Her prepared script was useless now. She looked out at the room, looked down at her notes, and made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She set the script aside. On behalf of Ridgeway Rail Corporation, I want to say what should have been said today from the beginning. We failed Harold Preston. We failed his family, and we failed the principles this company was supposed to stand for. The board will meet this afternoon to formally address every condition presented by the Preston family. She paused, and then she said the name. Harold James Preston designed the emergency braking protocol that Ridgeway Rail has used for over 2 decades. His contribution saved lives, including the 206 passengers on the Ridgeway Express 2 weeks ago. His name should never have been removed from our records, and it will be restored. Miles stood at the side of the stage. The notebook was pressed against his chest. He looked at his grandmother. Edna looked back. She gave him one nod, small, firm. The same nod she had given him the morning she handed him the notebook. It was done. Clayton Moore Jr. was not in the room. He had not been invited. But he watched the entire press conference from his living room on a television that was too large for a man who suddenly felt very small. The boy who had been told to sit down had just stood up in front of the entire nation. And the company that had spent 22 years erasing a name had just been forced to say it out loud, with the whole world listening. 6 weeks later, the sun came through the tall windows of the Ridgeway Rail headquarters lobby like it had been waiting for permission to enter. The lobby had been renovated. Not the walls or the floors or the fixtures. Those were the same polished marble and brushed steel they had always been. What changed was what hung on them, a new plaque, bronze, mounted at eye level beside the main entrance, where every employee, every visitor, every passenger who walked through those doors would see it before they saw anything else. Harold James Preston, Senior Engineer, Ridgeway Rail Corporation, 1978 to 2004. Creator of the Preston Emergency Braking Protocol. His work has saved thousands of lives. His legacy will not be erased again. The unveiling ceremony was small, deliberate, not a press event, a family event. Ridgeway's new interim CEO, Catherine Shaw, had asked Miles what kind of ceremony he wanted. Quiet, he said. My grandfather was a quiet man, so they kept it quiet. 30 people in the lobby. Edna, Miles, Thomas Bradley, Garrett Wells, Nora Caldwell, standing in the back with her notebook closed for once. Darnell Cooper and Raymond Foster, the two engineers who had stood up at the press conference. A handful of Ridgeway employees who had known Harold and never spoken up. Catherine Shaw spoke first. Brief, direct, no corporate language. Harold Preston gave this company its most important safety innovation. We repaid him by erasing his name. That ends today. The emergency braking protocol will be officially renamed the Preston Protocol in all company documentation, effective immediately. Then she stepped aside. Edna walked to the plaque. 78 years old, navy blue dress, the same one she had worn to the press conference, the same one she had worn to Harold's funeral. She had told Miles this would be the last time she wore it for sadness. She stood in front of the plaque, read every word, traced Harold's name with her fingertip. There you are, Harold. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of that lobby, every person heard it. Right where you belong. Miles stood behind her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He held the notebook against his chest and let his grandmother have her moment, the moment she had earned through 22 years of keeping Harold's memory alive when no one else would. The room was still. No applause this time, just presence, just witness, just the quiet act of a wrong being set right in a building that had spent 2 decades pretending the wrong had never happened. After the ceremony, Catherine Shaw handed Miles an envelope. This is from the Ridgeway Rail Board of Directors. Miles opened it. A full scholarship, 4 years, Fullerton Institute of Technology, one of the top engineering programs in the country. Everything covered. The letter was addressed to Miles James Preston. The middle name was new. He had legally added it 3 weeks earlier. And this, Catherine handed him a second document, the founding charter for the Harold Preston Engineering Fellowship, an annual scholarship fund for Black students pursuing careers in transportation engineering. Funded by Ridgeway Rail, administered by an independent board, permanent. Miles read the charter. At the bottom, in the list of founding advisory board members, one name stood out. Garrett Wells. Miles looked across the lobby at Garrett. The old conductor was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking at the plaque. He felt Miles' gaze and turned. Their eyes met. Garrett nodded once. Miles nodded back. Nothing else needed to be said. The man who had looked away 22 years ago was now standing watch over the legacy he had once failed to protect. That evening, Miles sat in the engineering lab at Fullerton. His first week of classes didn't start for another month, but the department head had given him early access. The lab was empty and still. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. In front of Miles, spread across the work table, were the blueprints for a next-generation braking system, his senior thesis proposal, already accepted before his first class had even begun. Beside the blueprints sat the notebook, Harold's notebook. The leather was cracked, but the binding held. The pages were yellow, but the ink was still sharp. Every diagram, every note, every correction, still there, still legible, still true. Miles opened it to the last page, Harold's unsent letter. Underneath it, his own handwriting from the night before the press conference. "They will say your name tomorrow, Grandpa. I promise." They had said it. In a boardroom. On television. On a bronze plaque in the lobby of the company that had tried to erase it. In a hashtag shared by millions. In a fellowship that would carry it forward for generations. Miles smiled. A real smile. He turned to the next blank page, the first empty page after 40 years of Harold's writing. He picked up a pen, and in his own handwriting, small and precise and slanted slightly left, just like his grandfather's, he wrote, "Page 1, the next chapter." Then he began to draw. A new braking system, a new design, built on the foundation Harold had laid, reaching towards something Harold had never lived to see. The notebook was not finished. It was only just getting started. Have you ever seen someone robbed of the credit they deserved? Drop their story in the comments. Share this video for every person who was told they didn't matter. And subscribe, because these stories need to be told. Hashtag Justice for Harold Preston. Hashtag They Will Say Your Name. Hashtag Preston Protocol.
Here's what I'll say. If you know you can help, help. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone to invite you. Don't wait for people to believe in you. If you see the problem and you know the answer, step up. Right then, right there. Because the world is full of people who could help, but didn't. Who had the skill but stayed quiet. Who knew the answer but waited for someone else to say it. Don't be that person. And one more thing. If someone taught you something, use it. Don't let what they gave you to waste. The best way to honor the people who believed in you is to show up when it matters. That's it. Show up. Do what you know how to do, and let the results speak for themselves. Like, share, and subscribe. Real stories, real justice every week. And remember, when your moment comes, don't ask for permission. Just do what's right.